Hello everybody and welcome. My name is Julie Mann and I show men and women how they can create healthy, happy, sustainable lives. And I'm really delighted because today I'm joined by a voiceover artist. I'm joined by Liz Drury. Hi Liz.
Hello.
Good to see you in your studio.
Yes, do you know, I wasn't actually planning to record this from my studio. I would normally do it at my desk when it's a hot day like it is today. But in the next room, my daughter is playing a noisy game of Dungeons and Dragons with her friends. So I've had to come into the soundproof bit.
Amazing you're wearing any clothes at all. It's so hot.
Yeah, at the moment anyway.
So how do we start, Liz, with you telling us a little bit about your childhood?
Sure. So I grew up in rural Northamptonshire. My parents still live there in a village called Blisworth, right next to the Grand Union Canal. And I had a lovely childhood, actually. You're living out in the countryside and walking down the canal with the dog and that kind of thing. I have a younger sister and lived there till I was 18 and went off to university.
Fabulous. Did you have any aspirations when you were younger? Do you remember?
I think I wanted to be a teacher, probably because my mum was a primary school teacher, and during the summer holidays when she was preparing for the next year, my sister and I would get involved in getting her classroom ready, and it was always great fun. We used to go to the library and pick out books that were pertinent to the topic she was going to be doing that term. We would help her turn her classroom into a castle or whatever she was going to be teaching about, and I used to think, oh, that would be a great job. Until my mum said, no, don't do it.
What did you study at university?
So I went to university to study physics initially. When I did my GCSEs at school, I could have pretty much gone in any direction. I feel now I went in the wrong direction to start with, but I remember thinking, oh, there's not very many women in science, so I'm going to go that way. And I did physics, chemistry, maths, and German at A level. Went to Durham University to read physics, and I knew fairly early on that it really wasn't the course for me. And at the end of the first year, I took my first year exams and I did fine in the physics, but the maths that went alongside it, I failed, primarily because I hadn't done further maths and they kind of expected that you had, and it was just going over my head. And I retook the maths and I still failed it just by a whisker. And they said to me, although you didn't quite get the grade you needed in maths, we're happy for you to continue because your physics is fine. That they said, if you want to change course, now is the time to do it. And I've been sharing a room with another student who was doing archaeology, and what she was doing looked far more interesting than what I was doing. And at Durham, they did a course called Natural Sciences, which meant you could pick and choose and do more than one thing. So in order to keep going and not have to start over again, which I didn't want to do, I had to keep doing the physics, but I could do less of it and do something else alongside it. So I chose to do archaeological science, and I came out with a first class degree in the end. So I really enjoyed it. And from there, I actually went on and did a master's degree, again in archaeological science. And so that wasn't what I ever set out to do in the first place, but that's where I ended up.
Wow. And now you're doing something completely different. So what on earth led you to being in the voiceover industry?
Yeah, there is a kind of link. So after I did my master's, I went on and did a PhD, again in archaeological science. And my project was looking at things like tars and resins that have been used as glues and waterproofing agents during the Mesolithic period, which is about 5,000 to 10,000 years ago. And this kind of tarry resinous material only survives in boggy sites, such as are found in Scandinavia. So I went to Scandinavia for 3 weeks as part of my PhD and travel around collecting samples, including samples that came from these lumps of tar with human tooth impressions in that people had dubbed prehistoric chewing gum. And so I analysed some of these chewing gums and found they were made out of a tar that had been made by heating the bark of birch trees in the absence of air, and you get this black sticky tar. And birch bark tar was also used for waterproofing. It was used to stick arrowheads onto shafts and things like that. But nobody really knew what the purpose of these chewing gums was. So I wrote an article about prehistoric chewing gum for a magazine called British Archaeology, and I explored, possibilities such as it was being chewed in order to soften it before it was used as a glue. It was being chewed so people could clean their teeth. It was being chewed to get a natural high from it. All these different reasons, and I can only imagine that it was a really slow news week when this article came out, because the press got hold of this story about prehistoric chewing gum and it ran for about a fortnight. It was ridiculous. So my work was reported on the front page of the Times, the Telegraph, the Observer. I was in the Mail, the Express. I was interviewed on Radio 1, Radio 4, Radio 5 Live, loads of local radio stations. I had to get up at silly o'clock in the morning and do interviews with people in other countries. It just seemed to sort of capture people's imagination. And so during the fortnight when all this was happening, I got to know the people in the university PR department quite well, because they had a little recording studio with what's called an ISDN line, which could link to the radio stations. So I didn't have to go to the radio stations, but it sounded like I was there from the university. And I remember getting ready to do all these interviews once. I was sitting in a little box like this, waiting for the radio station to connect to me, thinking, I'm really enjoying this. This is really good fun. And so I started to do some work with the university PR department after that. And I wrote articles for the magazines that they put out. I went to the Tomorrow's World Live exhibition on their behalf. And so that's kind of really where I had my first taste of not voiceover exactly, but media and using microphones and so on. So that's kind of where I trace my interest back to.
Wow, that's quite an amazing story, isn't it? It kind of happened organically. Now, I know, because I've done voiceover work myself, but you have to be confident in order to use a microphone. Obviously, it takes, skill to learn how to do it, but you do need to have confidence. And, a lot of people are really terrified of public speaking, let alone, maybe in front of a couple of people, let alone doing it, to a microphone. So where do you think that confidence came from, Liz? Have you always been a confident person?
No, I wouldn't say that I have. And when I was at school, I absolutely hated the public speaking. I remember as part of GCSE English, you had to stand up and give a presentation on something, and I absolutely dreaded doing it. And as an undergraduate student, again, I would hate presenting to my peers, which was something that you had to do now and again. And it wasn't really until I was doing my PhD when what you're researching is so niche, nobody else is doing exactly the same thing as you, and so you become essentially the world expert on your little piece of archaeological science in my case. And so I found that did give me the confidence to be able to stand up at conferences and meetings and talk about what I was doing, because I knew what I was doing and I was the only one really that knew exactly what I was doing. And after that, I was never so scared of it again. And after I'd finished my PhD, I got married, and my husband is he's a chemist, a research scientist, and he got a job near to where we're living now on the Humber Bank in one of the chemical factories. And so we moved here. And what I had been interested in at that time was education in museums. I'd spent a summer as I was finishing up my PhD working at Eureka, the Science Museum for Children in Halifax. And I thought museum education was really interesting. And when we moved here, I wrote to all the museums in the area, and there was nothing in that kind of line. And so my husband's HR manager, who knew that we were new to the area, said to him, tell your wife to come in, I'll have a chat to her because I know lots of people in the area and I might be able to help her find something to do. So I went in and had a conversation with this guy, and he said, well, what are you interested in? And I said, well, I've explored museum education. That's what I was thinking of, but I know there's nothing happening here at the moment. And he said, okay, what else? And so I told him the story about the prehistoric chewing gum and how I'd quite enjoyed doing the radio interviews and so on and so forth. He said, he says, I know the guy who runs the local cable TV station. I will put you in touch with him. So I went along to this TV station, which was just amazing. And it was in a little town of Immingham in northeast Lincolnshire, not the kind of place you'd expect to find a TV station at all. And the station itself was in what had been a middle school. And so northeast Lincolnshire had gone from being a 3-tier education system down to 2-tier, and this school became redundant. And so the studio was in what had been, the assembly hall, the dining hall, and then they had built around it some sound studios, some video editing suites and so on. And they'd had a massive injection of cash from European grant funding to set the studio up, but the place itself was run on a shoestring. So after I'd had a look round, I said to the guy, this is amazing, I'd love to work here. And he said, well, sadly we haven't got any jobs available, but if you want to come as a volunteer, he said, we're always looking for extra help. So I went in as a volunteer, and I thought, well, what a great way to get to know an area I know nothing about by getting involved with a community television station. And after about 3 weeks of volunteering, they said, the job of receptionist has just come up if you want it. And I thought, well, I have a PhD. I feel a little overqualified to be a receptionist, but I'm doing this now and I'm not getting paid, so I might as well say yes and get paid for it. So I took the job, and I did that job for about a year. And a few months after I'd started working there, they had auditions for people who wanted to be new volunteer presenters because they had no money to pay anybody. And I didn't put my name down for it. And the day it was happening, I mentioned it to my husband. And he said, why didn't you sign up? He said, I think you would have been really good at that. I said, well, it's too late now. They've filled the schedule and there isn't any more room. So off I went to work, and it started to snow. And it snowed really heavily. And so all these people that signed up to come and do an audition couldn't make it. So I said to the producer, look, can I have a go? And he said, yeah, we've got plenty of time now. Come and do a screen test. So I did, and they liked what I did. And they said, oh, yes, we'll use you. But because I was the receptionist and tied to the reception desk most of the time, my opportunities to get involved in the presenting were quite limited. It was only really if somebody else was sick or on holiday that I would get an opportunity. And so after I'd worked there for about a year, I was pretty sick of being a receptionist and having people be rude to me all the time. And I went and found myself another job as a journalist with a publication, a business publication in Grimsby. Went to see my boss, handed my notice. He said, no, he says, don't go. He said, I know people that have worked there. They didn't like it. You won't like it either. And I've just applied for this big grant. If it comes off, there's a much better job for you. And he said, I'm sure I'm going to get this money. So I said, okay. And I rang the publication and said, I'm not coming, I'm staying where I am. And fortunately, he did get this money that he was talking about, and I did get a better job. And after that, I became a regular presenter on the channel, and I had my own program called Community Express, which went out live twice a week. And it was a magazine style program. So I would have guests in the studio who I'd interview live on air. And in between times would go out into the community and would film whatever was going on and make video inserts for the program. And I did that for a couple of years, and I had a great time. And we used to have this van that said Channel 7 on the side of it that we were all insured to drive. And I remember driving down back from Grimsby one day, having been to film, I don't know, whatever we've been to film, thinking, this has just been really great fun and I'm actually getting paid for doing this. And so that was where I did my first proper voiceover work, was as a presenter at the channel, because we were on a shoestring and we all did a bit of everything. And so I would provide voiceover for some of the adverts that went on the channel, or for short documentaries that we made. We'd have people come in who were making, there was a big e-learning course being made at the time, a bit like a forerunner to GCSE Bite Size. So it's for GCSE students, and I was the voice of lots of those modules. So that was sort of where I started in voiceover. And I only left there to have my children. My eldest is now 19, so that's how long ago it was. And I intended to go back afterwards. And while I was off, the business got sold. It was sold to the local further education college, so they could use it as a training ground for their broadcast journalism students. And so there was no job to go back to. And so at that time, I thought, you know, my career in the media had been quite short-lived, and I'd probably never go back to it again.
Wow, that's so brilliant. So you didn't really have any formal training, you kind of learned on the job. That's so fantastic. So obviously you were talking a little bit about the fact that when you were younger, you didn't feel very confident presenting. So tell us about some of the other challenges that you've had in your life and how you overcame them.
Well, the next biggest challenge probably happened in 2011. So after I had left the TV studios and I had my baby, obviously, well, the next challenge then was to get back into work again, and I couldn't go back to the job that I'd had because it didn't exist anymore. And that was quite a funny little story actually about how I ended up with my next job. So back before, I know I'm going off topic now. Back before I worked at the studios, I had applied for a job at the local sixth form college to work in their school's liaison department, which wasn't a job that I wanted actually, but I was signing on at the job centre and I had to show willing and apply for something. So I applied for that. And I actually got down to the shortlist for that job. And fortunately, somebody else got it, which I was really pleased about. But some years later, so I've lost my job at the TV studio. I've had my daughter, and I was at a concert and found myself sitting next to the guy from the sixth form college who had interviewed me some years before. And we got chatting. And he said, "Oh, you work at Channel 7 now, don't you?" And I said, "Well, I did." And I told him what had happened. And he said, "Oh," he says, "I've got a project coming up that I think you'd be suitable for. Send me your CV." So I did. And what they were looking for was somebody who could conduct on-camera interviews, because they were making some staff training materials that included a lot of video, and they needed to record some talking heads, and the staff couldn't just talk to the camera. They needed somebody to interview them to get the information out. And so I ended up working at this sixth form college. And after that project, had my son. A bit later, they called me and said, "We've got another project. Can you come back?" And I ended up working there for about a dozen years in the end. And it's funny because I've never had a job that I've got through any of the normal channels, you know, where you've applied, had an interview and been appointed. That's never happened to me. Work has always kind of come to me. And people said, "Oh, could you do this?" And I've gone, "Oh, yeah, I think so."
I guess that's partly, Liz, because you are so open to opportunity and you say yes to things, even though you're really not quite sure from the sound of it. You know, when
yeah,
you
yeah.
your journey, which I think is brilliant. So I know that right now you are in your home studio. And I know that actually when you do voiceover stuff, you have to obviously record it, you have to edit it, you have to work to a deadline, you're marketing yourself, you know, because you're a sole business owner, aren't you? And it really maybe sounds like it could be a little bit stressful. Do you find it ever stressful, or are you quite kind of calm no matter what's happening?
I think I try and appear calm. Maybe a bit like a swan, you know, paddling furiously underneath. So yeah, and the thing about being a voiceover artist, and I guess it's probably the same in any kind of you know, freelance career, there are quiet times and busy times, and work tends to be like buses. You know, I can have a really quiet week thinking, "Oh, when's the next job coming?" And the next week several people want me all at once, and then I have to really you know, schedule things in to make sure everything gets done. So yes, it can get quite stressful. And of course, you know, we're just concentrating on your business because there's also the rest of your life to deal with. And working from home, you know, it's hard to ignore the pile of washing that needs doing, or the fact that the dog needs to go out, or the dinner needs cooking. There's always something else that needs doing as well. So you know, I do find that I have to be quite disciplined to make sure that things don't get overwhelming and too stressful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's the same with any business. When someone is working from home, there's all those other distractions, aren't there? So talk us through a typical day for you, Liz.
So a typical day, the first thing that I always do is walk my dog once I've got up. And that kind of that starts my day off. So he's then quiet and I can get on with what I need to do. And what I try and do every evening actually is prepare what I'm going to do the following day. So I have a notepad next to my computer written down all the things that I need to do the following day. And there are things that I try and do every day, which includes a lot of marketing, because unless people know about you, no one's going to hire you. So I try and reach out to people by email or on social media, connect with new people and grow my network. I will also create some social media posts to go out there to remind people that I exist. If I've got recording to do, I will try and get that done in the morning when I'm feeling sort of most fresh. Of course, it might be that a job doesn't come into the afternoon with a really tight turnaround, so you can't always plan when that's going to happen. So if I've got recording work, I'll get that done, and then once you've recorded it, as you've already alluded to, it then has to be edited, and that can take longer than the actual recording took, depending on how many mistakes I made or how many times the dog barked or the postman came to the door. So then the editing happens, and I also do a lot of networking for my business. Of course, over the last 18 months, that's all been on Zoom, so that's great. So it doesn't mean so I don't have to actually go anywhere. Or there might be, now we're kind of coming back to face-to-face, there might be a face-to-face networking meeting that I'm going to. That's kind of what happens on a daily basis. Lots of marketing, lots of social media, and recording. Sorry?
Lots of juggling.
Lots of juggling, always lots of juggling, yes.
What would you say, Liz, are the kind of skills and qualities that someone who's doing a voiceover needs?
So people think that all you need is a nice voice, which is an asset, obviously, but certainly not the whole story. There's a lot to learn, and just coming back to your earlier questions, which I went off on a tangent, and you said about overcoming difficulties. At the end of 2011, my husband was asked to go and work in the States for a couple of years. And so I had to decide whether I was going to give up my job and leave all my family and my friends, and whether we were going to move the family to America, which we did, because, as you've already said, I'm the kind of person that likes to say yes to things. And being in America, that gave me the opportunity to train. Because the kind of visa I had meant I wasn't allowed to work, at least initially. So I used the opportunity while I wasn't working to go to college, and I did acting and I did singing, which are two things that feed very well into voiceover. And it was in America that I got back into voiceover again, just because I had the opportunity. And I took a course that was called Acting for the Camera, run by an actress who did some voiceover work, and only 4 people showed up to her class. So she said, well, there's only a few of you, so tell me what you're interested in and I'll tailor the course to you. And so I said to her, well, I've had some experience of voiceover, but I've got no idea how I go about pursuing that any further. And so she was able to help me. She put me in touch with a friend of hers who has a recording studio, and he does a lot of corporate narration, e-learning, health and safety videos, that kind of thing, and sometimes needs a British accent. So I did a couple of jobs for him, and she told me about some websites where you can have a profile and clients will post jobs online and you audition for them. And I started to get a bit of work, and I realized I was only going to get more work and better work if I'd got a properly produced voiceover demo, which wasn't something I felt I could do for myself. So I then started to look for who could help me with that, and came across a company called Edge Studio, who are based largely in New York, but have a satellite studio in Washington, DC, which is about a 40-minute drive from where we were living. So that was great. And so I signed up with them, I trained with them, I made my first demos with them, and started my business actually in America, and then brought it back home with me. But going through that training with Edge Studio was so valuable, because what it taught me was that they cover all sorts of voiceover genres. So they'll teach you how to narrate an audio book, or to narrate e-learning, or to voice over a commercial. But they also put quite a lot of focus on the business side of things as well. And of course, that's the other skill set that you need, because it's no good having a great voice and knowing how to use a microphone if you don't know how to market yourself, you don't know how to send an invoice, you don't know how to chase people up when they haven't paid you, and all those other hundreds of little things that you need to do as a business owner. So there's an awful lot of skills required, and another additional skill on top of being a voiceover artist is learning to edit, and that was a huge steep learning curve to start with because I'd never done anything like that before. But I think, if you can use a computer, a keyboard and a mouse, you can learn the audio editing. It just takes a little while.
Yeah, actually, you've just answered my next question, which is about the fact that it doesn't matter how much talent you have. If you're going to build a successful business, you have to do those other things, some of which you might not want to do, but they have to be done anyway, regardless. Now, I know that you actually did win the top 100 small businesses in the UK, didn't you?
Back in 2017, yes, the Small Business Saturday team, or the Small Business Britain team, who organise Small Business Saturday, every year they look for 100 small businesses that they will then help promote. And so I entered my business back in 2017 and found out actually while I was on holiday that I was one of 2017's top 100. And that was amazing. The Small Business Britain team are brilliant. It's a great network to be a part of. And so what happens with the 100 businesses, in the 100 days leading up to Small Business Saturday, which is at the beginning of December, each one of those businesses gets their own day when they are featured, and the Small Business Britain team will promote them across all the social media channels, and they will interview you, and it's just a really great community. And what's happened was in the around just before Small Business Saturday, we all got invited down to London to go to 10 Downing Street, which was just an incredible day. And some of the businesses that had physical products had the opportunity to have a stand and a bit of a stall inside 10 Downing Street. And it was a great opportunity to network with the other winners, of course. And there were speeches from ministers and so on, and free wine and canapes. And I have to say that the inside of 10 Downing Street was just like everything I wanted it to be, wood paneling and deep carpets and chandeliers and paintings by famous people on the walls. And it was just a brilliant experience. And having been a winner, I'm now part of that community forevermore. And pre-pandemic, we would have a meetup every year in London for not just the new 100 businesses, but all the previous winners are eligible to go as well. And great networking opportunity, which I really missed.
Yeah, what a wonderful experience. I was going to ask you though, in a nutshell, Liz, why did you win?
Why did I win? I think, my business is quite unusual, for one thing. I think, I can show that I have grown my business. I have an interesting backstory that you've just heard about. And the small business team are always interested in how people got started. So I think that's definitely part of it, having an interesting story and being able to tell it well.
Brilliant, which is what voiceover is all about, isn't it?
Yes.
Telling that story. It's all about the story. So one final question, Liz, before we go. When you are no longer on this planet, how would you like people to remember you?
I would like to be remembered as having been really helpful to people. I always try and help people who are coming into my industry, or even established people in my industry. If I know something that they don't, I like to help pass on the knowledge. So I always enjoy talking at conferences and giving webinars and so on. So yeah, I'd like to be remembered as somebody who was really helpful to others.
Wonderful. Well, I'm going to put all your links below this video, so please do check Liz out. But all there is for me to say, Liz, it's been absolutely brilliant talking to you. So Liz Drury, thank you ever so much.
Thank you for having me.